Okay, so let's continue with our next video in practice exam question series for AWS Certified Developer Associate exam. So let's read question number 91. A company needs to develop a proof of concept. So they just need to develop a proof of concept for a web service application. The application will show the weather forecast for one of the company's office location. So this application is just to tell the weather for one of the location. And the application will provide a REST endpoint. So you have the REST endpoint, which the clients can call. If they call, they will get the weather details for one of the office location. Where possible, the application should be caching feature provided by AWS to limit the number of requests to backend server. So they said like if possible, like implement the caching as well, so that the number of requests to the backend will reduce. The application backend will receive a small amount of traffic only during testing. So they said we don't have any much load. We are just like because doing a proof of concept. So because just for the testing we will receive a very small number of traffic. What should the developer take to provide the REST endpoint most cost effectively? Create a container image, deploy the container image by using EKS. So it's wrong because EKS is like a orchestration service where some pods are running, right? So multiple services are running, huge load, you want scaling, but it is just a proof of concept and small amount of traffic. So it's not a like ideal solution and not a most cost effective as well, because the question says we need to find the most cost effective. Create a AWS Lambda function by using SAM. Expose the Lambda functionality by using API gateway. This looks correct. We can just create a Lambda function because um, for the cost, whatever the number of calls we will call the Lambda function, only for that we are going to pay that. Along with that, we are exposing it from the API gateway, and within the API gateway, you can enable the caching as well. Because here in the question they said the caching feature should be provided, so we can implement the caching in the API gateway. So B looks correct. Create a container image, deploy the container image by using ECS, expose the functionality by using API gateway. ECS still not the most cost-effective solution. Create a microservice application, deploy into the Beanstalk. Totally wrong. You should not in the Beanstalk. So B looks correct. Okay. So question number 92. An e-commerce web application that share session state on premises is being migrated to AWS. So there is some application where you have some sessions so a kind of a cookie session state on premises, but now it's by being migrated to AWS. The application must be fault tolerant, highly scalable, and service interruption should not affect the user experience. What is the best solution to store the session? Because earlier you are storing the session state into on premises. Now you are migrating to AWS. So where you can store the session state? Store the session state in Elastic Cache. Yeah, that is the best solution. We can use that. In the CloudFront, no, because CloudFront is only to deliver the static content. S3, no. Then enable sticky session, no, because if you enable the sticky session, what is going to be happen? The load on one of the EC2 instance is going to be increased because you have stick that. So A looks correct to me. Question number 93. A developer is building an application that uses DynamoDB. The developer want to retrieve multiple specific items from the database with a single API call. So we have data in DynamoDB, and what developer wants to retrieve multiple specific items. So they have list of items, maybe customer ID 1 record, customer ID 2 record, customer ID 3 record. They want to retrieve that. Uh, DynamoDB API call will meet this requirement. So which query you are going to run? Uh, so scan query, no, because scan is going to scan everything. So which is you have to like give more cost and it will take more time. Scan is not a get item just to retrieve one item, but we have to retrieve multiple items. So get item is also wrong. Now option is batch get item and query. So in the query is correct as well. Batch get item is also correct, but batch get item is correct because here it is mentioned multiple specific items. Even within the query, when you say like let's suppose if you're using something, retrieve this element where customer id is equal to 0001, so it is going to retrieve all the items belongs to the customer id 1. All right. But in the DynamoDB, you can't say, okay, retrieve the item where the customer ID in 001, 002, 003, 004. Let's suppose you have 4 customer ID. Then you can't retrieve. And the question says you have the specific item, maybe customer ID 1, customer ID 2, customer ID 3. So when you have the multiple primary keys, so then the batch get item is the correct answer. So A will be the correct answer. Question number 94. A developer has written an application that run on EC2. So we are application running on EC2. A developer is adding functionality for the application write object to S3. So this application from EC2 is going to write something on S3. Which policy must the developer allow? So basically, if EC2 instance one AWS service trying to access the another AWS service, we need to update the IAM role. That's it. So IAM policy that is attached to the EC2 totally correct. Session policy wrong. KMS wrong. VPC endpoint wrong. So A is the correct answer. Question number 95. A developer is leveraging a border gateway protocol based AWS VPN connection to connect from on-premises to EC2 instance in the developer account. So they are using the BGP to connect from on-premises to EC2 instance within the AWS. The developer is able to access EC2 in subnet A, but unable to access EC2 in subnet B. Which logs the developer should verify to check whether the traffic is reaching to the subnet B. So if you want to check the logs within the VPC, then the best option is the VPC flow logs, because VPC flow log which will tell you what all incoming traffic is coming and what all outgoing traffic is outgoing from the VPC within the particular VPC. So you can use that. So AWS CloudTrail wrong. AWS CloudTrail is just to log because when you call some AWS services, that API is going to be logged into CloudTrail. So this will eliminate BGP logs just for the VPN wrongs. VPC is the correct option. Question number 96. A developer is creating a service that use an Amazon S3 bucket for image upload. So we are uploading some images to S3. The service will use an AWS Lambda function to create a thumbnail of each image. So we have the lambda function. As soon as we maybe upload image, a lambda function is going to be called so that a thumbnail of that image has been created. Each time image is uploaded, the service send an email notification and create a thumbnail. So basically what will happen, we have S3 bucket for image upload, we have the lambda function for processing the image. So when the image is uploaded, we need to send an email notification first and then create the thumbnail. All right. So it's not like that first create a thumbnail and send the notification. It's like we need to first send a notification and we need to create that thumbnail. A developer needs to configure the image processing and email notification setup. So how they can do that? So whenever you say email notification, so you can use the SNS. So let's see where is the SNS in the option. So option C, SQSQ, option D, SQSQ, we can ignore that even without reading the further option. Even if you have to read the further full option, create a SQSQ, send S3 event notification to event bridge. Like why should send notification to event bridge? We can send directly to the SNS or even the Lambda. So this looks wrong. Configure S3 event notification SQSQ. Like SQSQ is not for the notification. SNS is notification. C and D is wrong. So A and B has something related to SNS, but let's read. Create a simple notification topic. Okay. Configure S3 event notification with the destination of SNS topic. Yes, because as soon as the image is uploaded, we need to send the notification. Subscribe the Lambda function to the SNS topic. Create an email notification subscription to the SNS topic. Okay. Create a simple notification topic. Configure S3 event notification uh, with S3 SNS destination SNS topic. Subscribe the Lambda. Create a simple queue. Like no need to create a simple queue, right? So A looks correct. Question number 97. A developer has designed an application to store incoming data as a JSON file in S3 objects. So we are getting some JSON files we are storing into S3. Custom business logic in an AWS Lambda, then transform the objects and then Lambda function load the data into DynamoDB. So maybe as soon as the data loaded into S3 bucket, we trigger the Lambda We read the JSON file, maybe we extract some fields and load into DynamoDB table. Recently, the workload has experienced sudden significant spike or changes in traffic. And because of that, the flow of data DynamoDB is being throttled. The developer need to implement a solution to eliminate the throttling uh, and load the data into the DynamoDB table more consistently. So what should we do? All right. So because when the when it is trying to writing into DynamoDB, so the transition is getting throttled. So refactor the Lambda function into two functions. Configure one function to transform the data and one function to load the data into the DynamoDB table. Okay. Create a simple queue in between the function to hold the item as a message and then invoke the second function. A queue looks better option to me because this is going to prevent the throttling because you have the one function you transform using one function as soon as the object can transformed put into queue as a message, and then the second lambda is going to read from the queue and then load into the DynamoDB. This can be the option, and because if you have the buffer something, because main option is throttling, so you need to implement some kind of a buffer facility between. Turn on auto scaling on DynamoDB. I use Amazon CloudWatch to monitor the read and write capacity. So no, DynamoDB is like managed service automatic scalable. Create an alias for the Lambda function. Configure provision concurrency. No, provision concurrency is nothing. Is going not going to sort the throttled solution. Refactor the Lambda function into function. Configure one function to store the data into DynamoDB table. Configure the second function to process the data and update the items after the data is being stored into DynamoDB table. So why we need a Lambda to up to update the item when the data is already stored into DynamoDB table? Looks wrong. A looks correct to me. Question number 98. A developer is creating an AWS Lambda function in a VPC mode. So we have a Lambda in VPC. An Amazon S3 event will invoke the Lambda function when an object is uploaded into S3 bucket. So as soon as you upload something into S3, Lambda is going to be triggered. The Lambda function will process the object and produce some analytical result will be recorded into a file. So because some objects it will read, process it and store into a file. Each process object will also generate a log entry that will be recorded into a file. So some logs also will be written into a file. Other Lambda function, AWS service and on-premises resources must have access to the result file. So that's because this Lambda function is trying to write or log something into some file. This file should be accessed by other services. All right. Each log entry must be appended. The developer needs to find a solution that can be share file. So what you can do, because you need to like store this file at some place so that the other AWS service can use. All right. So let's see. EFS, yes, we can use that because it's a shared file system. Mount the EFS file system in Lambda, store the result and log file into the mount point, append the log entries. Okay. EBS, no, because if you have two EC2 instance, because EBS is specific to one EC2, doesn't look correct. Uh, Create it, store into the temp directory. No, because if you store the file into the temp directory, as soon as the Lambda is going to finish, because this is a ephemeral storage, the file is going to be deleted. Create a reference of the OPT storage directory. OPT is just to store the binaries, not for this. So this looks wrong. So A looks correct to me. Question number 99. A company has an AWS Lambda function that process incoming requests from an Amazon API gateway. So you have the API gateway, and behind that you have the Lambda function. The API calls the Lambda function by using a Lambda alias. So you have the Lambda alias, which is called by the API gateway. The developer updated the Lambda function code to handle more details related to the incoming request. So the developers just updated the Lambda function code. The developer wants to deploy the new Lambda function code for more testing by other developers with no impact to the customer. So like they have updated the code, but they don't want to deploy to the production, right? So they don't want to deploy to the production. They just want to do the testing by the other developers, and they don't want to impact the existing Lambda. So what they can do is, because you can just create an alias, right, or a different version. So all right, so that the existing Lambda is not going to be impacted. create a new version of the Lambda function, create a new stage on API gateway with integration to the Lambda function, use the API gateway to stage to test. Looks correct. Update the existing Lambda alias uh, by API gateway to weighted alias, add a new Lambda function as an additional weighted. So weight is wrong because weight says like 10% will go to this, 90% will go to this, but maybe still remaining 10% of the existing live customer can go to the our Lambda function. So be wrong. Create a new version of the Lambda function, create and deploy a second Lambda function to filter incoming request. No, wrong. Create a new version of the Lambda function, create a new API gateway. So new API gateway is going to, if you can create, the more complexity, more resources, more cost. So A looks correct. Question number 100. A company uses AWS Lambda function and an Amazon S3 trigger to process images into an S3 bucket. So you have images into S3 bucket. So a company, you use the Lambda function, right, to process those images from an S3 bucket. A development team set up multiple environments in a single AWS account. So within a single AWS account, you have the multiple environment, right? So maybe you have uh, dev, staging, test prod within the AWS account. After a recent production deployment, the development team observed that the development S3 bucket invoke the production lambda, because like maybe within a same AWS account, you created three lambdas. One is dev, one is test, one is production lambda, and you have three S3 bucket. So ideally, dev S3 bucket should call the dev lambda, production S3 bucket should call the production lambda. But what recently happened is the development S3 bucket is calling the production lambda. All right. So it means some access thing is setup is wrong. These invocation caused unwanted execution of the development S3 files by the production lambda. The development team must prevent this invocation. So you need to prevent. So if you need to prevent this invocation, what you can do, you can just like implement like a resource kind of policy, right? So we need to follow the security best practice. Upload the Update the lambda execution role of the production lambda function to add a policy that allow the execution role to read only from the production environment, only from the but it is not going to prevent well, anyhow, let's read the other options. Move the development and the production environment into separate AWS account. You can do that. You can create two different accounts. Add a resource policy to each Lambda function to allow only S3 buckets that are within the same account and invoke the function. You can do that, but like more infrastructure work, and you are um, like Lambda is already running into the production, so customer might also get impacted. Add a resource policy to the Lambda production Lambda function to allow only the production environment S3 bucket. So the problem is bucket is invoking the Lambda, right? So we need to put a resource policy into the Lambda so that when they are trying to call, it did not call. So we need, so C looks correct. Move the development and the production environment to separate. So still the same thing. We can ignore that B and D. Let's read A and C. So A says update a Lambda a resource policy so that only production S3 bucket can invoke, which actually we need because currently the development S3 bucket also invoking. Update the Lambda execution role. So Lambda execution role means they are going to access a read from S3 bucket. All right. But it is not going to prevent your execution. All right. Because we are updating the execution role. So it means even you update the Lambda execution role, Lambda still going to be triggered because you have not updated the resource policy, but Lambda is going to be fail with some error. Right, I don't have access to this bucket because you have updated the IAM policy or execution role. All right, but triggering is not going to be stopped, right? But we need to stop the triggering itself. So C looks correct to me. So they said B, but it looks C to me. Right. So let's read like why people are saying B. These people say C. I choose B because it's the team should follow the best secret AWS well architecture separation. Yeah, some people say C as well. Let's read. They have provided some link. How do you securely operate your workload? To operate your, you must or best practice to a variant. Uh, Secure account rules are separate workload using accounts. Establish common guidelines relationship environments such as production development and workload into multi-account level separation is strongly recommended, and it is strong isolation boundaries. Yes, you can do that as well. Hmm. Yeah, B will also make sense, but let's read. Add a resource policy to each Lambda function to allow only S3 bucket that are within the same account to invoke the function. Yes, this can also make sense because the question says follow the best security practice rather than the least operational cost. If it is the least operational cost, maybe the C will be the correct answer, but if it is the best practice, we can do this. So I am confused. Maybe B and C, but both B and C look correct to me. But anyhow, like because it's a best security practice, let's go with the B. So that's it. That's the end of the video, and thank you.